Hello there. Today I'm going to be attempting a new feature. Over the years I've had a number of questions in the comments section. Some of these have led to videos of their own, but many of the questions and answers are too short and simple to warrant a whole video. So in today's video I'm going to answer a number of these questions. The first question is on wampum economics. How could wampum be used as currency? If its production isn't centrally controlled, how does it maintain its value? So this is really two questions, right? How did wampum function as currency among the native people? How did wampum function as currency among the colonists? The answer to both is it didn't. For native people, it's because currency is very much the wrong way to describe it. Trade back then functioned very differently, right? This is a pre-capitalist, even pre-market world. The value of items in any exchange was just based on what both parties thought was fair. This value could vary dramatically just based on the quality of the goods and the temperament of the traders. The only special status that wampum held as a trade good was due to the ratio of labor to portability. Among the colonists, for a very brief period, wampum was indeed currency. However, people quickly figured out how to mass produce it, and the bottom fell out of the market. So how did wampum function as currency? In both cases, it didn't. The next question: how often do you think Iroquoian people still used bows in combat after the introduction of guns? My understanding is that bows were not used in war by anyone who had a gun and powder. For all of their advantages, arrows just don't compete with an inch-wide ball of supersonic lead. By the late 1600s, bows were pretty much just used for hunting. The next question: what can you tell me about tobacco and other herbs used in pipe ceremonies? I find it fascinating. So tobacco has got three uses. The first is political. People at councils or diplomatic meetings would smoke from the same pipe. The tobacco calms the nerves and sharpens the mind, to help prevent people from acting hastily and to help people think their way through an issue. It's also quite difficult to be angry with someone you're sharing a pipe with, helping to prevent conflict. Tobacco is also smoked recreationally, to help you relax after a hard day of work. The frequency seems to have varied nation to nation and even village to village. The Piton, for example, are described as having a smoke break every couple of hours. Other people are described as only smoking just before bed, and other people only seem to have smoked at rituals. On the ritual, spiritual side, I'm not really qualified to say much. It's supposed to please the spirits and thin the barriers. So, for example, people burn tobacco when they kill a deer, right? Sweetgrass and sage are also burnt as part of rituals, but you don't smoke them. Certain other herbs are supposed to have been smoked for medicinal reasons. Cure a toothache or a headache, for example. The next question is on local bow woods. What were the most popular woods in your area? Locust and orange? Locust and orange don't naturally grow this far north. I know Osage orange was imported in small numbers, but being hauled halfway across the continent naturally made it quite expensive and thus fairly rare. The best local bow wood is Canada yew, but it was not commonly used because the trees hardly ever grow into a useful shape. They're rather stunted compared to European yew. The most common local bow woods were hickory and ash. Not first-rate materials compared to a lot of things, but still pretty good. The next question is on siege warfare. Did natives in North America develop siege weaponry of any kind? I'm thinking of that longhouse video where you walked us through the fortifications and explained the maze design. I'm wondering what counter-tactics were used. So on the subject of siege weapons, there are three pieces of siege equipment that I'm aware of. The first is the mantlet. These were large portable shields made from small logs bound together with cord. You can imagine something similar to my wooden slat armor, but with logs instead of slats and rope instead of cord. These were used to approach walls and to shelter archers. Another device is sort of a stationary tower used to gain a better vantage point from which to shoot at the archers on the walls, but I don't really have any useful information on that. A third device is a siege ladder made out of a tree trunk with steps cut into it. You could use these to try and scale the walls where there's a parapet. A fourth sort of impromptu siege weapon would be a canoe. You can use this as a portable shield as well as a ladder. The drawback is that if your canoe gets shot full of holes, you're going to have a hard time escaping. On the subject of tactics, there are three that I'm aware of. The first, most direct, is just to get your best guys with the best kit and try and power through the maze. If you manage to push the defenders back a few meters from the inside opening and establish a foothold, you could flood into the village fairly easily. It was for this reason that the maze worked in the first place. If it was just a death trap, nobody would fall for it, and it would be no different from an expensive wall. The second tactic would be to try and sneak up and start a fire. Easier said than done in an era without petrochemicals. You would need the fire to go unnoticed by the defenders until it was well established. Otherwise, they would just dump a load of dirt on it. The third tactic would be to climb the walls. You could use the aforementioned ladders in an assault this way. But this is risky, as the only places you could climb easily were the parapets. Nothing on the other side to receive you on most of the wall. The walls themselves could also be climbed if you're fit and agile, unencumbered, and nobody's shooting at you. It was common during sieges for young men to try and prove themselves by trying to climb the wall at night, then to get in and steal something or cause some trouble before escaping. A related question: was the maze system common enough amongst villages that the strategy behind it was easily recognized by an attacking force? If the maze system was relatively common among the Haudenosaunee, wouldn't it be a well-known tactic that could easily be avoided? Or were attackers aware of the danger but willing to brave the maze? Yes, they were. As a defender, the one thing you do not want is a long, drawn-out siege. In an extended siege, the attackers always win, because supplies inside the walls are limited and supplies outside the walls are unlimited. So as a defender, what you want is for the enemy to attack you, but to attack in such a way that the odds are more in your favor. The maze is a vulnerability. It's not just an opening in the wall, but it's a space where the enemy is sheltered from your arrows. Here's a crude illustration to demonstrate. The black lines are the walls, and then at the bottom we've got a simple maze. The circles are the turrets. The red lines are everywhere that is exposed to arrow fire. The green lines are a blind spot in the town's defenses, a place where the enemy can regroup and prepare to launch their attack. Intentionally or not, the maze doesn't function like some tower defense video game. It's not some corridor of death designed to whittle the enemy down before they reach you. The purpose of the maze is to negate any numerical advantage the opponent might have. Regardless of how many attackers there are, the maze means that the attackers will have to come out one or two at a time. Whereas on the inside of the maze, you have enough space to station 2 or maybe 3 or 4 men. So because of the maze, the siege changes from a battle of, let's say, 200 attackers versus 100 defenders, into 200 2-on-1 duels. 2-on-1 is bad odds for the attacker, but not insurmountable if you're skilled and lucky, and that's why the maze worked. The next question is on travel. Do you have any insights on how Iroquois traveled on long foot distances? Did they use backpacks, pouches, food they would have brought with them? Did they use natural shelters, or did they carry animal skins? There were backpacks made of a woven ash basket put on a wooden frame. You can imagine something like these, but with a wooden backpack frame integrated. For heavier loads, you might use a travois pulled by dogs, or in winter a toboggan. Bags of cloth or leather, or pottery or split ash baskets could be strapped to the travois or the bed of the toboggan. For travel food, pemmican was used. Pemmican has got a lot of calories relative to weight, and it will keep almost indefinitely even without refrigeration. It's also able to satisfy just about all of your nutritional requirements. Theoretically, you could live off pemmican alone for your whole life and there wouldn't be any real health consequences. Other than boredom, I guess. In terms of travel shelter, if you were only staying in a place for one night, you would make a simple shelter from conifer branches and deadfall, the sort of thing Boy Scouts build in the park. Longer-term shelters, for if you're going to be staying in the same place for a month or so, you would make a bit like an Ojibwe wigwam but smaller. Ideally, you'd use birch bark, but if that wasn't available, you just use any old hardwood. The final question of the day: can you talk about First Nations blacksmithing? Sure, I can talk about it. So firstly, I need to clarify that blacksmithing is ironwork. That's what I'm going to be talking about. The only indigenous group to have a precolumbian ironworking tradition is the Inuit. They would cold forge meteorites to make knives and other blades. Because the atmosphere is thinner up there, more meteorites are able to make it to the earth without burning up. Because there's less vegetation, they're easier to find. Thus, ironwork without iron smelting. For everybody else, ironwork is post-colonial. For the Six Nations, the style of metalwork was explicitly colonial. I remember reading somewhere about how in the 1600s, people were getting sick of the colonists having a monopoly on iron, so the Six Nations sent out some of their young people to the colonies to apprentice among them and bring the skill back. Fast forward to the mid-late 1700s, and most villages would have a blacksmith. Unfortunately, because people got the skill from the colonists, they just adopted the colonial style and never really developed a specific, unique style. A similar story occurred for most of the sedentary or semi-sedentary peoples on the East Coast. Among more nomadic peoples further inland, blacksmithing was limited by the weight of the tools. People of the Great Plains, for instance, learned how to cold forge knives, spear points, and arrowheads out of scrap metal. They would buy a broken saw or something for next to nothing and then cut it up to make tools. A truly unique tradition did develop among the more sedentary peoples of the far west. Here, due to trade networks, iron arrived before the colonists. Without anybody to teach them, local craftsmen had to figure it out on their own, and as a result they developed some truly wonderful styles. And that's what I know about First Nations blacksmithing. There are of course traditions with other metals, but those aren't my field and I'm not very knowledgeable. To learn more about precolumbian metalworking, I might recommend a video by Ancient Americas about the Old Copper Complex. With that recommendation, I'd like to issue one minor correction to the video in that copperworking didn't die with the Old Copper Complex, it just became way less common. As well as a video by Aztlan historian entitled Misconceptions, No Metal in the Americas. So I think that's a good place to leave it off for today. Thank you for watching. I hope you found these interesting.